Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Users, Groups, and Permissions. In this video, we're going to talk about how to be a little bit of a control freak when it comes to your SharePoint sites. We've been building sites all throughout this course, but not really delving into who can access them and who can do what. So I know a lot of you have been waiting for this video, so let's go ahead and talk about what's going to be covered. We're going to first start off talking about how to add users and groups from your Active Directory. Chances are you already have an Active Directory set up, so why not just use what's there and make our lives a little easier. Then we'll take those groups and users that we brought in, and we'll talk about how to set up site-wide, per site, and per list permissions. So if I could fit any more alliteration into that, I would, but we would need to be able to get to this permissions thing at a little more granular level. So we're going to talk about all three of these. Then we're going to talk about applying blog and wiki permissions a little bit differently because they're kind of separate styles of permissions, and so we're going to cover those separately. Then last but not least, in our what we covered, we'll talk about what it is that we did and provide you with your skill checklist to make sure that you can perform all the tasks that we performed in this video. So let's get started. So at this point in time, our site, well, it doesn't have any users. No one else except for us, except for the administrator, can actually get to it. And that's not so good. Being able to put up a really great SharePoint site that no one can see isn't really going to do us any good. A lot of administrators have expressed to me in the past, the concern about creating brand new web accounts for their users. And the nice thing about SharePoint is that you don't have to. You can just use what you have. As long as you're using Windows authentication, you just grab your users and groups from your Active Directory. And that really makes things really super easy. You grab your groups that you want to have access to your site, and you provide them permissions en masse. And you can do the permissions thing right at the front, and I'm going to show you that in just a few moments. But let's say that you have one or two users that you want to give special permissions to. This is pretty critical. If you want a particular user to have special permissions, you need to bring them in separately from the groups. Even though they might be part of a group, that's okay. It's not going to hurt anything. Permissions are additive, so you can add permissions to a particular user even though they might be in a group that only has, say, read-only or contribute permissions. You can still add them separately and give them full control permissions. So we have that flexibility. It's really pretty nice. So let's take a look at how to add our groups, and I'll also take a look at how to add a very specific user so we can give them full control. Let's move on over into our Verde Petra site, and I'm accessing it here once again from my Vista machine. Currently, once again, we have no users attached, so we're going to go to Site Actions and Site Settings. And we're going to come down here to People and Groups. You'll notice here that right now I've got nobody. I only have myself. So I'm going to go here to New, and I'm going to go to Add Users. And now I'm going to start adding users from my Active Directory. Now, of course, you need to know what their group names are and their usernames are, but obviously you're going to be doing this from an administrative standpoint, so you should have access to that anyway. So I'm going to bring in my ops group. I'm going to separate it by a semicolon. Let's see, we got pre-press, got to bring those guys in, the printing floor. Let's see, who else do we got? We got to have the maintenance crew and then the fulfillment crew. And I click on the little check name button, and that's going to give initial access to all of these users in these groups. Now I can give specific permission right now to everybody. So if I want to give everybody contribute permission, not a problem. We can do that right now. I think I'm going to take, in this case, a read-only view for everyone, and then I'll start adding in specific permissions to specific sites and to specific objects in those sites. So I'm going to tell that OK. And now the users in these groups will now be able to go to Publishing Center :17158. They'll be able to at least see the site. They won't really be able to do anything on it. Now let's bring in one more here. I'm going to go here to New and Add Users. And I'm going to bring in Mary, the ops manager. So I'm going to give her, I'll give her full control permission right now and tell it okay. All right, so I have all the groups, and I have Mary Wheat, who is the ops manager, and I will make her essentially have full control over the entire top level site as well as all of the sub sites underneath. By default, you're probably going to do this most of the time. When you're initially creating your sites, you're going to be inheriting permissions from the top level site, whatever site it happens to be under. And then we can make alterations to that, give unique permissions to each individual site and each individual object in that site as need be. All right, so we're all set to go right here. Everybody's been added. They can at least see, and Mary now has full control over the entire site. All right, so let's go back to our slides now. And so we have set up and specified and allowed everyone to at least have read access, so we're good to go. Let's move on to our next item. All right, setting up our sites site-wide, per site and per list and even per list item. It's a very simple process. It's not much harder than what we just did. And since we've already talked about this a little bit, let's go back and just revisit it. Permissions can be inherited, and we can drop them all the way down the levels of our sites, however many levels are in our hierarchy we may have. But what we can also do is we can specify specific permissions for very specific elements. For example, Mary's magnificent meanderings. We may only want to give a certain subset of our users access to actually do commenting on her blog. And the same with the pre-press wiki library. Do we want everybody to be able to go in and edit their wiki? Probably not, because it's their processes. And if we have folks who come in from maintenance or from fulfillment, well, they don't know anything about pre-press, so they have no business editing that pre-press wiki. So before we headlong into adding permissions to our different sites, let's go over and let's check one more thing. Applying wiki and blog permissions. They're slightly strange, okay? Because with a blog, we have actually two kinds of objects happening in a blog. We have the blog post, and we also have the blog comments. Now, if we have a contribute set of permissions on a user account, they can comment, but they can't actually produce a post. Now, obviously, a read-only account, they can't comment. They can just look at it. That's it. The design permissions has just a little more capabilities. They can actually post a blog, they can edit the blog, they can approve posts and comments. And you can pretty much guess what full control is going to have, right? It's just pretty much a dust statement. Now, wiki, we have a similar kind of thing. The read option has the ability to read current as well as the historical or past versions. So they can go back and see what a user or what a post would have in what it might have looked like maybe a week ago or so. The contribute and design options, these pretty much have the same thing. No big surprise here. And then we also have the full control, which gives you everything, plus the managerial capability of permissions. So as we get ready to jump into our Verde Petra project, let's go and let's take a look at the direction. The CIO is tired of dictating the project. He's delegated control over the initial test policies to you, and you've decided that it might be a good idea to lock out the groups from maintenance, with the exception of the maintenance group and Mary, the ops manager, also known as Mom, because obviously she needs to get to it, the maintenance folks need to get to it, but everybody else, I'm not really crazy about having the printing crew all about coming over to the maintenance site and adding tasks to their list, because who knows what they'll add. We also need to make sure that Mary has ownership of her blog and that everyone else can comment. And also with that pre-press wiki, we're only going to set it so that they can edit their wiki, and we'll give everybody else read access to it. And then, of course, we'll make sure that everyone else has contribute access to the rest of the ops sites. So let's go ahead and move back over to our Verde Petra website. And this is right exactly where we left off. Let's start by moving over to the maintenance site. And let's make sure that the maintenance group has the ability to add to their items here, the contribute permission, as well as setting it up so that no one else can actually go to the maintenance site at all. So we'll go to Site Actions and Site Settings. Scroll down, and we'll go to here to Advanced Permissions. And you see here we have our groups that we set up earlier. We're inheriting our permissions currently from the top level site. We want to make that stop, so we're going to go here to Actions, and we're going to select Edit Permissions. And we're going to tell this OK, because yes, we know we're not going to be inheriting the permissions from the parent website anymore. Tell that OK. And now we're going to specify who could do what. So let's make sure that the maintenance folks can actually get to and contribute to their own website. So we're going to put a check mark in maintenance. We're going to go to Actions, and we're going to select Edit User Permissions. And we're going to uncheck Read Only, and we'll give them Contribute and tell it OK. And most of the users who actually belong on the site, you're probably going to want to give contribute permissions to, just so you know. It's kind of one of those default things that unless there's a really good reason not to, you go ahead and give it to them, because they can't really do that much damage with a contribute permission set. All right, so everybody else now, we're going to actually remove their permissions altogether. So I'm going to put a check mark in everyone else, go up here to Actions, and remove user permissions. And we'll tell it OK. And now the only people who now have access to this site are the boss, Mary, and the Verde Petra maintenance crew, and that's it. The maintenance crew also has contribute, although mom, she has the full control. So we're good to go for that. All right, so we've set up this per site set of permissions. Now let's go to pre-press. Let's make an alteration on their pre-press knowledge base. I'm going to click on their wiki here. Remember earlier I was telling you that blogs and wikis, their permissions are a little bit weird. Remember, I think we talked about this a little bit ago. We go to the history section in order to do management of permissions for the wiki. So I go here to manage permissions. Currently you see that we pretty much have nobody. We don't have, currently this one is not inheriting permissions from its parent folder. And that's okay, we don't want it to. If we wanted it to, by the way, we could go to Actions and inherit permissions, and we just get permissions from the top level or parent site. So let's go ahead and add users. And once again, we're going to add the pre-press folks to this one. And we'll just give them contribute access right off the get-go here. And then we'll probably want to, once again, go back and let's add in the manager. And we'll make sure that the manager also has full control. And now we're all set up there. Now, everybody else, if we want to add them, well, we can. We'll go ahead and we'll just add those real quick. And we'll just give them read-only access. So they'll be able to actually read the pre-press knowledge base. They just won't be able to do anything with it, which is not a bad go. Very few folks will probably meander over into the pre-press knowledge base anyway, because it's a very specialized set of knowledge. So I'm not that worried about it in terms of permissions and administration. This should be good enough. Okay. So now let's meander back on over to Mary's blogs, Mary's Magnificent Meanderings. And let's set up the permissions for this, Site Actions and Site Settings. And once again, Advanced Permissions. Now, Mary Wheat already has full control, so she has the ability to post to the blog, not a problem, and control the blog. Everyone else now has the ability to read it. Okay, well, that's okay, but now we want them to be able to actually have the ability to comment. So we're going to go to Edit, or Actions, Edit Permissions. And then once again, it's going to give us the warning. That's fine. Tell it OK. And now I'm going to give everyone else contribute permissions. and that will allow them to contribute to the blog. So this is all set up, and you see how this is really easy stuff. Now, if we go back to the home page, and let's say that we go to the announcements. Let's check and see what kind of permissions set we have on the announcements. We'll go to list settings, and then we'll go to permissions for this list. We can even set permissions directly on individual lists and even list items themselves. Right now, only Mary Wheat has full control over this list. No one else can even contribute to it. Everyone else is just read-only. That's it. And in this instance, that's probably a good thing. We don't want everyone and their brother coming up to this list and posting new stuff on it without our permission. So we're okay here, and this is pretty much going to be one of those top-down kind of lists. Not a lot of interaction with this particular item. Now, if we go in back to announcements, and let's go into Company Picnic, just for example's sake. You notice that even Company Picnic has its own permissions. Now, right now, Company Picnic is inheriting its permissions from the announcements item, and you'll see that currently we have the same basic permissions as what we had with the default announcements list. So we're all good here, but we could, if we wanted to, manage and alter the permissions even on this one specific item. So if we wanted people to be able to manage and maybe interact with this item a little bit more, which we don't, how much more can you interact with a Company Picnic item? But honestly, if we want more interaction, we could use other objects. We're probably not going to give specific permissions on an individual list item unless, of course, it's an individual item that makes sense to do so. So we have looked at the top level site. We have looked at the per site items. We've looked at per list items. We've looked at per lists permissions. Well, we have pretty much wrestled all this, and we saw that most of it, it's all the same. There's not a lot of variation with the exception of the blog and the wiki. And that's really the wiki permissions, that's really all in the location. It's in that history item rather than in a standard site settings and permissions option. Everything else is pretty much all here in settings and list settings. We're back here at the operations or site actions and site settings. There's just not a lot of change. It's all very easily handled. It's all very easily managed using the web form interface. I think there's probably one more thing that we are missing here off of our list. Let's go back and check our Verde Petra list real quick and see everyone else will have contribute access. Let's go back and let's fix that. So here we are at site settings. I'm going to go to advanced permissions, and right now everyone is attached to read. I'm going to go ahead and give everyone in this site the contribute permission on everything else that inherits permissions from this operations site. So the printing or the prepress wiki, it's still going to have its own unique permissions. And let me just go show you real quick. Prepress knowledge base, history, and manage permissions. And you'll see here that everyone else is still set to read except for prepress, which is still contribute. So even though operations permissions just altered site-wide, because we're no longer inheriting permissions from the site itself, everyone is still stuck with their own set of permissions that we set a little bit earlier. All right, so we have wrapped up our tasks for this one. Let's go back to our slides. And let's talk about what it is that we covered in this lesson. In this lesson, I've shown you how to add users and groups from the Active Directory. You saw that that's really a piece of cake. You should also be able to modify permissions site-wide, per site, and per list, including the items that are attached to blogs and wikis. And we saw that pretty much they're all the same. Using the default sets of permissions are usually very appropriate. We usually don't have to go in and do a lot of alteration to those presets and those default set of permissions. We can go in and give different individuals full control, contribute control, design control, but those are the exceptions to the rule rather than the norm. All right, so we have wrapped up our video on permissions, so I will see you in just a little bit in our next video.